All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome back. We are in 2 Samuel of our book Bible study today, the Trimmed and Burning. We'll be in chapter 13. We've done the first 12 so far in our Sunday school in the mornings. And again, of course, we're telling this as one story through one family. This book's really easy to see because it is like one flowing story with David's family, but we're connecting this all to all the families that we learned about in the Bible that pertains to Christ's family. And we're in the history books. And I'm just going to jump right in because we got a good long chapter and a lot to talk about today. But just to recap what's been going on, 2 chapters ago, because we're in 13 today, 2 chapters ago was chapter 11. This is a common chapter people are familiar with, David and Bathsheba. Remember, he was supposed to be out at war because all the kings led the war in the springtime. David was not where he was supposed to be. I talked about that's how a lot of sin starts in our lives when we're in places we shouldn't be or not in places we should be, right? And because of that, he just happened to go outside. And because he was up on a rooftop, he was able to see Bathsheba. We don't think she was doing anything malicious here. She was just going through a cleansing ritual, and David was in the wrong because he stared at her and thought she was beautiful and took her on. Then David tried to cover his sin with Uriah. Remember, he tried to convince him to sleep with Bathsheba to cover up the pregnancy. When he wouldn't do that, he tried to get him drunk. That didn't work. So then, of course, he had him assassinated on the battlefield in a really terrible situation. That was his sin just kept going further and further there. And that shows us that when sin goes unchecked, it's just going to get worse. And then, of course, like I said, David had Uriah murdered. They were all supposed to pull back, but Joab didn't. Other men died. Joab didn't follow David's orders completely, but I'm sure I talked about how Joab, it would have been hard for him to turn on Uriah like this when Uriah was one of the mighty men. So it would have been hard getting an order that you had to abandon your friend on the battlefield. That wasn't very heroic. And Joab probably had a problem with it, but ended up getting other people killed. And again, the sin just kept going and going. Not only did Uriah die, but other people died because of David's sin, if you think about it. All the other people that died in the battlefield was because David slept with Bathsheba. And then again, I put out the map just so you know we've been talking a lot about different places and all these kings from Aram Zobah and all the Ammon and Moab. So there you can see Edom's down to the southeast, Moab's down there, Ammon. That's where a lot of the battle's been going. Rabbah just got taken recently in the story we were reading. There it is, just so you can see all of that there. Then remember last week when we were here, Nathan rebuked David. He came in and told him this parable. David didn't know it was a parable, probably thought, remember, David's the king, and things like this are probably always brought to him, all these disagreements. So he brought Nathan was talking about some rich guy who stole some guy's innocent pet lamb when he had all these other lambs, and he killed it. And David got furious, remember, and said, hey, that guy needs to be killed, which was a little extreme because the law didn't say it needed to be killed, but he had to be restored fourfold, which David did say based on the law. And then, of course, Nathan says, the man is you, David. You are the man that I'm talking about. And David repents, which is why he's the man after God's own heart. Not because he's perfect, obviously. This is why we're here. It's not perfect. This is a bad situation. But it's his reaction, very different than Saul. Saul was you have two kinds of people, and we can be both of them sometimes. When you get caught in your sin, you have the people like Saul that says, well, this is why I did it. It wasn't really sin because this is why. And they try to explain away the sin. Then there's people like David, which is God just calls us to be like David. When you get presented with sin, say, I'm sorry, I was wrong. I shouldn't have done that, right? So that's why he's the man after God's own heart. It doesn't have anything to do with his actions, other than his actions, his reactions, and his repentance there, right? But we did learn about how David fourfold will pay for it. Just like, for every sheep, you're supposed to pay fourfold. David did pronounce his own situation. His baby dies, Amnon dies, Absalom dies, and Adonijah dies. So he loses 4 children, according to the law in that parable, which is really interesting there. Then I talked about David's child died. Remember, he was praying and mourning for it, and he wouldn't eat or anything like that, hoping that the Lord would return the baby, even though the Lord sent with Nathan that the baby was going to die. But he prayed because we know in other times God says something and you can pray, and he doesn't change his mind. It appears to us that he does, but God will answer prayer. We have, Jonah and Nineveh. It didn't happen yet in this story or by this time, but there's other situations like that. Where it looks like God changes his mind. Doesn't really, but David tried, he prayed, and the Lord didn't answer, and then he was able to eat, his people were all confused, like, why are you able to eat? And he said, well, the child's dead. He'll never come back to me, but I will go to him, which is a sign of the afterlife in the Old Testament. And then, like I said, Rabbah ended up getting captured then. Joab said, hey, David, you better get down here. I cut off their water supply. You better get down here before I take this, and they're going to say that Joab defeated them. And he knew it was honorable for a king to do this. So David gets down there, and they claim Rabbah. They take over it. And this again, why is this at the end? It doesn't seem like a random part of chapter 12. Like we're talking about Nathan rebuking David, and then all of a sudden, the last couple verses here, 6 verses or whatever it is, David wins the battle. Well, this is a sign that now that David's sin had been dealt with, remember the child died after 7 days. 7, usually a sign of completeness. This judgment, this sin had been completely judged in God's eyes for that. And I mean, there's still going to be repercussions in his family, as we're going to see the rest of the book. But that had been finally judged. Now, once the child had died, now the Lord allows them to win the war. Because remember, this has been going on for at least a year. Because he got, Bathsheba pregnant, and then the child dies. So there's that whole gap in there, which means David didn't repent any time in there, which meant the fight was still going on because, it wasn't settled yet. So once God settles this, then he's able to be with David again to win the battles. And you can see David is restored here. And that was chapter 12. And now we're going to go ahead right into chapter 13 because it's a nice long one, 39 verses, I believe. And there's a lot in here that we'll be able to go ahead and break down. I'll make sure I get through all of it if I can. All right, 2 Samuel 13, verse 1. Let me get here we go. Now Absalom, David's son, had a beautiful sister whose name was Tamar. And after a time, Amnon, David's son, loved her. And Amnon was so tormented that he made himself ill because of his sister Tamar, for she was a virgin, and it seemed impossible to Amnon to do anything to her. But Amnon had a friend whose name was Jonadab, the son of Shimeah, David's brother. And Jonadab was a very crafty man. And he said to him, "O son of the king, why are you so haggard morning after morning? Will you not tell me?" Amnon said to him, "I love Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister." Jonadab said to him, "Lie down on your bed and pretend to be ill. And when your father comes to see you, say to him, 'Let my sister Tamar come and give me bread to eat, and prepare the food in my sight, that I may see it and eat it from her hand.'" So Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill. And when the king came to see him, Amnon said to the king, "Please let my sister Tamar come and make a couple of cakes in my sight, that I may eat from her hand." Then David sent home to Tamar, saying, "Go to your brother Amnon's house and prepare food for him." So Tamar went to her brother Amnon's house, where he was lying down. And she took dough and kneaded it and made cakes in his sight and baked the cakes. And she took the pan and emptied it out before him, but he refused to eat. And Amnon said, "Send everyone out from me." So everyone went out from him. Then Amnon said to Tamar, "Bring the food into the chamber that I may eat from your hand." And Tamar took the cakes she made him and brought them into the chamber to Amnon her brother. When she brought them near to him to eat, he took hold of her and said to her, "Come, lie with me, my sister." She answered him, "No, my brother, do not violate me, for such a thing is not done in Israel. Do not do this outrageous thing. As for me, where could I carry my shame? And as for you, you would be as one of the outrageous fools in Israel. Now therefore, please speak to the king, for he will not withhold me from you." But he would not listen to her, and being stronger than she, he violated her and lay with her. Then Amnon hated her with very great hatred, so that the hatred with which he hated her was greater than the love with which he had loved her. And Amnon said to her, "Get up, go." But she said to him, "No, my brother, for this is wrong in sending me away, is greater than the other that you did to me." But he would not listen to her. He called the young man who served him and said, "Put this woman out of my presence and bolt the door after her." Now she was wearing a long robe with sleeves, for thus were the virgin daughters of the king dressed. So his servant put her out and bolted the door after her. And Tamar put ashes on her head and tore the long robe that she wore. And she laid her hand on her head and went away crying aloud as she went. And her brother Absalom said to her, "Has Amnon your brother been with you? Now hold your peace, my sister. He is your brother. Do not take this to heart." So Tamar lived a desolate woman in her brother Absalom's house. When King David heard of all these things, he was very angry. But Absalom spoke to Amnon neither good nor bad, for Absalom hated Amnon because he had violated his sister Tamar. After 2 full years, Absalom had sheep shears at Baal Hazor, which is near Ephraim. And Absalom invited all the king's sons. And Absalom came to the king and said, "Behold, your servant has sheep shears. Please let the king and his servants go with your servant." But the king said to Absalom, "No, my son, let us not all go, lest we be burdensome to you." He pressed him, but he would not go, but gave him his blessing. Then Absalom said, "If not, please let my brother Amnon go with us." And the king said to him, "Why should he go with you?" But Absalom pressed him until he let Amnon and all the king's sons go with him. Then Absalom commanded his servants, "Mark when Amnon's heart is merry with wine. And when I say to you, 'Strike Amnon,' then kill him. Do not fear. Have I not commanded you? Be courageous and be valiant." So the servants of Absalom did to Amnon as Absalom had commanded. Then all the king's sons arose, and each mounted his mule and fled. While they were on the way, news came to David, Absalom has struck down all the king's sons, and not one of them is left. Then the king arose and tore his garments and lay on the earth, and all his servants who were standing by there tore their garments. But Jonadab, the son of Shimeah, David's brother, said, "Let not my lord suppose that they have killed all the young men, the king's sons, for Amnon alone is dead. For by the command of Absalom, this has been determined from the day he violated his sister Tamar. Now therefore, let not my lord the king so take it to heart as to suppose that all the king's sons are dead, for Amnon alone is dead." But Absalom fled, and the young man who kept the watch lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, many people were coming from the road behind him by the side of the mountain. And Jonadab said to the king, "Behold, the king's sons have come, as your servant said, so it has come about." And as soon as he had finished speaking, behold, the king's sons came and lifted up their voices and wept. And the king also and all his servants wept very bitterly. But Absalom fled and went to Talmai, the son of Ammihud, king of Geshur. And David mourned for his son day after day. So Absalom fled and went to Geshur, and was there 3 years. And the spirit of the king longed to go out to Absalom, because he was comforted about Amnon, since he was dead. And that is the end of the chapter. An ugly chapter in the Bible, but it's something that David ended up causing with this sin, we'll find out, is why this comes to be. Let's go ahead and start breaking down these verses and what it was actually saying here. So verse number 1 starts, "Now Absalom, David's son, had a beautiful sister whose name was Tamar." So we're going to get 3 characters in this story that might not have been dived into before, brought up before. You're going to have Absalom here. You have to understand, Absalom is David's 3rd son, and later we know he's known as one of his most evil sons. He tries to overthrow David later from chapters 15 through 18. Then you have Tamar, who we're talking about in this story. Tamar is Absalom's full sister, okay? So it means they have the same father and the same mother. They actually come from Maacah. If you read in 2 Samuel 3:3, we read that Absalom came from Maacah, which is one of David's many wives. So they're full brother and sister. Meanwhile, you have Amnon, who is David's oldest son, and he's their half-brother because he's the son of Ahinoam. If you look in 2 Samuel 3, verse 2 ahead of them. So he's the son of Ahinoam, so they're a half-brother, right? Half-brother and half-sister to Amnon. And what's interesting here is it uses the word beautiful. Usually in the Bible, unfortunately, when it says the woman is beautiful, it has something to do that's going to happen with her appearance. A lot of times this foreshadows where beauty becomes a factor. In Genesis 12, you have that with Sarah. We had that with Bathsheba in 2 Samuel 11. So you know there's going to be some kind of situation there based on that. So we kind of get some foreshadowing there. Then verse 1 says, "And after a time, Amnon, David's son, loved her." So this is really strange because remember, this is half-sister, and he knows this. He calls her sister later on. But he falls in love, so it says, with Tamar. Now it says after a time, which is interesting. So it suggests that there's this growing obsession. You know, he thought she was beautiful, then he thought about it more and looked at her some more, and it kept growing and growing and growing, and he was lusting after her, and he probably shouldn't have been, but it took time, and it was a growing obsession. This happens with people even today, get obsessed with people. And it says loved her, but we can look at, if you look at the biblical New Testament terms of love, 1 Corinthians 13 talks about how love is patient and kind and selfless. And you're going to find out that when it says love here, that's not really what it's talking about. This is more like a lust than a love. It's a counterfeit love, which is what lust is, by the way. When people lust after people, they think they're in love with the other person, but it really just has a temporary lustful aspect, which is like it is here. Because Amnon, you're going to see, is going to be selfish, obsessive, and harmful. And if he loved Tamar, he never would have done any of this stuff to her. So this is what you can say is a love, but it's a counterfeit love. It's not real love. He thinks it's love, but he's really lusting after her, and we know by the way he treats her later. Verse number 2, "And Amnon was so tormented that he made himself ill because of his sister Tamar." So again, that's how we know it's an obsession, right? If you love somebody, I don't think you get ill over it. I mean, you might have butterflies and things like that, but even that's usually in the beginning stages and things. This seems to be getting physically ill. There seems to be some mental things going on here, right? And this does really happen. Your sins, your lust, these things that you think of can actually have a physical effect on you, right? So this uncontrolled lust ends up manifesting as a physical health issue, showing that, again, this is this obsession. Jesus, again, also warned about lust, and this is what it does and all the bad things it does. Matthew 5:28 said that it happens in the heart, and you can see it happening right here. Although Amnon had not done anything to Tamar, He's getting physically sick about it, which means he's acting on it in his mind, and a lot of things are going on. And even scientists today will tell you what happens in your mind affects your body, right? People are stressed out. You actually die of stress, they do say now. Some people get gray hair. That's a real thing. If you get gray hair from being stressed out, your body can actually have physical effects on how you mentally think about things, right? And you can see that here. Definitely, the Bible proves this. He's just obsessing over his half-sister. So bizarre to us. And he's making himself physically sick over it, right? Verse 2, still, for she was a virgin, and it seemed impossible to Amnon to do anything to her. Why was it impossible for him to do anything to her? Well, one, she's a virgin, and back then, you didn't know culturally, virgins were kept under strict supervision. Basically, they had bodyguards, probably. So, like, if Tamar went somebody, she wasn't alone. So that kind of makes it impossible. She's a virgin, she's guarded. Not to mention she's the princess. She's a princess of the king. Remember that. She's the king's daughter, so she probably has a royal crew with her anyway. But on top of that, let's forget the whole family aspect and that she's a princess of the king, the daughter of the king. The law of Moses forbid incest in Leviticus 18 and 20. So this would be considered incest, so it breaks the law there. And violating a virgin, even if it wasn't his sister or wasn't David's, carried severe consequences as well. And Deuteronomy 22 talks about that. If you violate one, you'd have to marry her, and it makes all these other situations really bad. So incest was wrong, violating a virgin was wrong, and he knew, and like I said, she had bodyguards, so it seemed impossible. So it's probably why he's making himself sick. He's obsessed with her, and he's like, I don't know how I'm going to even get with her, and I'm in love with her. And he's probably convinced he's in love with her, but he's lusting after her. Look at verse 3. This is where it takes a wicked turn even more. But Amnon had a friend, quote unquote, whose name was Jonadab, the son of Shimeah, David's brother. So right there, that's David's brother Shimeah. It's David's brother's son. So this is David's nephew, Jonadab. So Jonadab and Amnon are friends, but they're also cousins, which you'll see that in the Bible a lot. Their family, kind of keeps in touch with each other throughout the things. And Jonadab is Amnon's cousin, so he's kind of part of the royal family, but it calls him a friend, but it should really be a toxic influence, right? A toxic influence. Jonadab stands at the contrast of biblical wisdom, and it shows you what an ungodly friendship can do. So just because they're your friend, and even if they're a believer or something, some people just give bad advice. Some people even claim to be Christians and they're not, or especially people who are ungodly that don't know Christ are going to give you some terrible advice sometimes because they're thinking not in godly ways, but in human ways, and sometimes deceptive ways. You're going to see that's what Jonadab's doing. And Jonadab's going to help make things worse for Amnon, and that follows along with Proverbs 13:20. Whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm. We're going to see that. 1 Corinthians also talks on this. 1 Corinthians 15:33, do not be deceived. Bad company ruins good morals. So this is a lesson to us. If you have any Jonadabs in your life, beware. They'll give you advice. It'll be bad advice that'll get you into wicked things later, get you into trouble later. So it calls him a friend here, but he's not really a friend. Later it'll also call him a crafty man. And a crafty man here is more like, it's the same way crafty was used in Genesis 3. Remember the crafty being in the garden? That was Satan, the serpent, right? So the same term is used about Jonadab here. He's crafty, he's deceitful, he's smart, and he's deceitful, and he has wicked plans. Verse 4 says, O son of the king, why are you so haggard morning after morning? So he announced him as son of the king. By the way, Amnon, because he's the oldest, he'd be like the crown prince, right? So Amnon's actually next in line to become king, which is really interesting. So he called him son of the king. He's the highest ranking prince, right? The heir to the throne. And he says, why are you so haggard morning after morning? Why did he look haggard after morning? Well, remember, he made himself physically ill. So this shows you your mental health can affect you so bad that you don't even know it, and the people around you are noticing it. He didn't say, hey, why do you look sick today? He said, morning after morning. He's like, man, there's something going on with you. Every day I see you, you're like a mess. What is going on with you, man? Like, you are just a wreck. You're not the same. There's something going on in your life. What is it? And again, this shows that sin left unchecked can actually drain you emotionally and physically. His sin is getting to him, and this can affect you just like it affected him. But instead of rebuking Amnon, Jonadab's going to enable and justify his obsession. If Jonadab would be a good friend here, what Amnon's about to tell him here, Jonadab would have stopped him and said, hey man, that's not right. But instead, he takes it further. But it says, Amnon answers, I love Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister. Now, does anybody wonder, why do you think he called her my brother Absalom's sister? Anybody have any guesses why he would say my brother Absalom's sister?
Distance?
Yes, correct. To distance himself. Like, well, that's not my full sister. That's Absalom's full sister. We're not completely related. So even in his response, he's been probably mentally thinking about this, right? It's why he's answering the way it is, because he's expecting him to say, well, isn't that your sister? He can't even say this. He's going to say, no, I said that's Absalom's sister. He's trying to make that separation of distance. What is he trying to do? Justify his sin, just like Saul did in the past, right? Well, it's okay because of this. It's not technically a sin because of this little loophole, right? And I think that's really what he's getting at. It's a subtle reference there, but that's exactly what he's doing. Paul's right here. He's trying to distance himself, right? So this is what Jonadab has a plan for then. It says, verse 5, it says, lie down on your bed and pretend to be ill. Now this is interesting. It says pretend to be ill. Although we just learned he's kind of really ill, but it's mentally ill. He's mentally ill. It's causing his body to be physically ill. But he wants him to pretend as if he's like physically ill and there's nothing mentally going on about this. So Jonadab has an evil plan, a deceptive plan, which again is direct contrast to godly wisdom. Jonadab should have said, hey, that's your sister, even though I know it's Absalom's sister, but it's also your half-sister. Like, there's a lot of other beautiful women. You're the crown prince. You're the next guy in line. There's some beautiful woman you'll be able to get. Just somebody outside your family. He should have done that, but instead, he manipulates and uses deceit and gets Amnon to actually listen to his deceitful plan here. Then we'll go down to, let's see, verse 6 here. So Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill. So like I said, Amnon puts Jonadab's deceptive plan into action. He pretends. He says, you know what, that's a really good idea. I'm going to give it a try because right now it seems impossible for me to do anything. This plan might work, Jonadab. Not a bad idea. So deception here is used in Scripture, but this is common, right? Deception. Remember, Satan, he was crafty. He deceived Eve, said that they wouldn't die and they could eat his fruit and everything would be fine. That was deceptive. Remember Jacob with Isaac? How he deceived Isaac to get what he wanted, right? David deceived Uriah, you could even say, try to manipulate that whole situation. So you can see there's a lot of sinful scheming going on in the Bible, which means it also goes on in our lives. Be careful you're not sinfully crafting your sins to pull off your sinful passions, right? That's what's going on here. And when the king came to see him, it says in verse 6, which means David, who loves his son. Remember, this is his crown prince who's going to be the next king when David dies. Amnon is going to be the king. So David shows favor for him, right? He goes to see him. And verse 6 continues on, says, please let my sisters, Amnon, please let my sister Tamar come and make a couple of cakes in my sight that I may eat from her hand. Now, this is a really unusual request. Why does Tamar, David should have asked this, why does Tamar need to prepare the food personally? She's a princess. She has her own servants. Servants typically are the ones that cook the royal food, not the princess. So he should ask that. Another thing, why must she feed him directly out of the hand? This is a really intimate request, and I don't even think the servants did that. So it's taking it a little further. There's what we would call red flags on this request here that the King David ignores. And why do you think he ignores it? Probably because he sees the best in his son. It's his son, Amnon. He's going to be the king next. And he's a great guy. He's my son, and I love him. And he must just be really sick, right? David trusts his son because he loves his son, and this can happen with parents, where you can trust your kids, like, oh, they want the best. And meanwhile, they're scheming, and they have you involved in it. Because guess what? David's involved in this whole scheme. He's going to make it happen because he's oblivious because he was not attuned to what was going on. He didn't have any discernment to notice these red flags that we can just from reading this say, this is kind of sounds off. That why does she have to eat out of his hand? Why is she serving it when she's not a servant? She's the princess. So verse 7 says, then David sent home to Tamar saying, go to your brother Amnon's house, prepare food for him. So David unknowingly facilitates Amnon's sin. Like I said, because he was not discernible, David could have said, no, Amnon, your sister doesn't do that. Tamar doesn't do that. I'll send one of my servants. They'll make you stuff. He could have done that. Why he did that? Just trusted Amnon. He said, you know what? Amnon wants this. He's my son. He's sick. He gets what he wants, right? My son is sick. I give him what he wants. It's kind of the situation here. His trust in Amnon has been misplaced. Maybe Amnon's been trustworthy in the past, but his trust has been misplaced, and he avoided red flags. So even people that you love and you trust, if they ever get red flags, don't pass them by. Stop and consider them, right? Verse number 8. So Tamar went to her brother Amnon's house where he was lying down. So look at Tamar here. Obeys without question. You don't say, and then Tamar asked, why am I doing this, Dad? Why am I the one? Can't you send my servants? You don't see that, right? He just says, yep, as you wish, Father. I'll do it. I'm the princess, but I'll go down and do the servant job because you said so, right? So you can see here, she's obedient, she's innocent. So we have this innocent contrast. It's like Bathsheba, what's called the innocent ewe lamb. If there's a ewe lamb story about this, Tamar would be the innocent one, right? She just is obeying, she's obedient, and she's listening to what her father says. She goes down there and checks it out. It says, and she took dough and kneaded it and made cakes in his sight and baked the cakes. So not only did she make him the food, she followed the request. She was trying to take care of Amnon, and she believes he's sick too. So she's probably like, oh, my brother, my poor brother, he's really sick. If he really wants me here and this is going to make him feel better, I'll do it. I'll do it because I love my brother, right? Verse number 9. And she took the pan and emptied it out before him, but he refused to eat. So Amnon refusing to eat shows us again, this is a false pretense. He wasn't really hungry, right? This is all a trap. Should have been suspicious when he said, hey, could you imagine, like, hey, run to McDonald's, I really need a burger, and you bring the burger back. It's like, I'm not eating. It's like, what? You made this whole thing that I would make this arrangement for you to have food, and you don't want to eat it? So there's something, we can see there's something going on here, and this is where the true intentions start to unfold. Now we're going to see his true intentions. Verse 9, and Amnon said, send out everyone from me. So everyone went out from him. He cleared the room. He isolates Tamar, which is common among predators. People who are sexual predators, which you can call Amnon a sexual predator, will like to isolate their victim, right? And that's what he's doing here. Everybody out, everybody out. Why? Because Tamar had bodyguards that probably would have stuck up for her when they saw what was happening. So we know it's premeditated. He probably already had the idea to remove the witnesses. It's a strange request. But remember what happens in isolation before sin. Joseph was alone with Potiphar's wife. That almost happened. Luckily, Joseph was stronger, was able to get away. Eve was alone with the serpent. Adam wasn't there. She was isolated. And Bathsheba was isolated. So we're seeing this pattern again. When people get isolated, is how people get entrapped, right? They're deceived. They're isolated then by their predators, right? And that's what's happening here. Verse 10, then Amnon said to Tamar, bring the food into the chamber that I may eat it from your hand. And Tamar took the cakes she had made and brought them into the chamber to Amnon, her brother. So it's interesting here. It says her brother here. So it's emphasizing here this is going to be a tragedy. This is her brother. This shouldn't be happening here. But when she brought them near to him, he took hold of her. So now physical force begins. Now it's no longer manipulation. Now it's forceful coercion. He's now grabbing a hold of her. And this is a turning point. Now the sin is no longer hidden. Now it's being physically acted out. Just like how it was in his mind and then made him physically sick. Well, now it was in his mind. Now it's physically happening here. And he says, come lie with me, my sister. Look at Amnon. He has lost so much self-control. He's so involved in a sin that's going to happen to people. They're not even thinking straight. Remember before when he said Absalom's sister? Now he doesn't even care. He says, I don't care if you're my sister. I am so involved. I got a hold of you right now. I don't even care about justifying this. I'm just going for it. So you can see Amnon is already losing his mind. He was trying to distance himself from her. Now he doesn't care because he's in the moment and his sin is manifesting and he loves it because people love their sin. Verse 12, no, my brother, do not violate me, for such a thing is not done in Israel. Do not do this outrageous thing. So she calls him my brother to, like, remember, we're siblings. This is not right. It says, do not do this outrageous thing, which that term is the same term, if you remember in Genesis 34, back when Shechem violated Dinah, same kind of story, and then the brothers went and killed all the people of Shechem. It was the same term, outrageous thing. So she's probably even hearkening back, like, hey, remember when Dinah, our ancestor, got violated like this? This is not a good thing. You're going to be outrageous, or this is going to be an outrageous thing. And it says in verse 13, as for me, where could I carry my shame? This is because women in ancient Israel faced extreme shame if violated, even if it wasn't their choice. They were violated, and because they were impure, nobody would want to marry them because you had to marry a virgin who was pure. They wouldn't have children. They wouldn't have a husband, and the husbands were their security. That's actually how they were provided for because they were considered kind of like property, as we would see today. They didn't have a lot of rights like they did, and they depended a lot on the men, right? So she's even saying this is going to be bad. As for you, you would be as one of the outrageous fools in Israel, saying you're going to be called a fool, but Amnon doesn't care because he's in this sin. You can tell somebody in their sin all they want. They don't care about the repercussions, or they wouldn't be doing it. When they're in it, they really don't care about the repercussions, and you can see this here because he continues on. Now, therefore, please speak to the king, for he will not withhold me from you. That's in verse 13. Tamar suggests a legal and honorable way, although we're not even sure if it's right, because marriage between siblings was forbidden in Leviticus 18. There were some exceptions, like Abraham and Sarah. Maybe she's harkening back on that. But I think Tamar's just in desperation mode. Like, listen. It's so bad now. You violated me. You got don't do this. You could just marry me. Ask David, even though it might not even be possible. She's just trying to get out of the situation, and I can like sympathize with her here, even if it's not true and they couldn't get married. Tamar is just trying to get out of here. Verse 14, but he would not listen to her, and being stronger than she, he violated her and lay with her. So this again ruins basically Tamar here. And sadly, Amnon ignored every warning from Tamar. Look at all those warnings Tamar gave before he actually committed this crime. She warned him over and over and over, just like our sins usually warned over and over by God in our hearts, like we're convicted by the Holy Spirit, or somebody in our life says, hey, you shouldn't be, I see you're slipping down this path. You probably shouldn't be. And you get all these warnings. If you miss all the warnings, there's going to be trouble that'll come to your door here. Verse 15, then Amnon hated her with every very great hatred, so that hatred with which he hated her was greater than the love with which he had loved her. So that's how you can tell it wasn't love. How did he hate her? Well, a lot of times guilt and shame overcome somebody when they sin. You know this. When you sin, you know you shouldn't have done it, you get guilty and shameful. And now he's looking at her and he's disgusted because now she represents his sin. And now he hates her because of the way he feels. And you can see he wasn't really loving her. And guys, a lot of guys do this. You can even hear it today. I remember hearing friends do awful things to women. And afterwards, they want nothing to do with them. You see that pattern has been going on for a long time. He basically used and abused his daughter in a terrible way. Then says, get up and go. Like now is shouting at her. Went from being in love to her to treating her like dirt. So you can see he's objectifying Tamar, and he's not who he said he was. He was not in love with her at all. Verse 16, but she said to him, no, my brother, for this is wrong, and sending me away is greater than the other you did to me. Tamar is probably crying at this point, saying, if you do this, I'm never going to, what you did, if you send me away, I'm never going to have security, I'm never going to have a husband, I'm never going to have kids. She says this wrong is greater than even the violation, because the violation hurt her in that moment. If he sends her away, which he will, that'll hurt her for the future. So you can see this is how our sins affect other people. Amnon's senseless sin is going to ruin Tamar's life. It says he would not listen to her. And in verse 17, he calls his young man and says to put this woman out of my presence and bolt the door after him. So this shows complete rejection and abandonment of Tamar. Now he's like, there's no way, and he's locking the door, symbolizing you're permanently gone from my life, Tamar. I don't want you anymore. I wanted you for one day, and that was it. I wasn't really in love with you, and get out of my presence. It's about as evil as it gets. Verse 18, now she was wearing a long robe with sleeves, for thus were the virgin daughters of the king dressed. So she's all dressed in her royal garb. So his servant put her out and bolted her, so listen to her. But in that sleeve, she ripped her sleeves open. That's long robe with sleeves used the same ketanet pasim. It's the same phrase of Joseph's coat of many colors. So probably a really nice robe that she had for being the princess's daughter. So his servant pulled her out, bolted the door after her. She gets kicked out, and Tamar put ashes on her head and tore the long robes that she wore. Remember, this is a sign of mourning, right? So she's mourning basically her life. She's tearing her robes. It's a terrible thing. She's going to throw dirt on her head, just like we've seen before, and she's mourning. Nobody died other than her life. Her life is now dead. What she thought was the future of her life is now gone and dead, never to live again, right? So she's kind of mourning in a way her own situation here. Verse 19, she laid her hand on her head and went away, crying aloud as she went. Not only is she going to mourn, she's going to cry out loud, which is great. She's going to cry out loud because it's not going to be a secret sin. She's not going to go away privately. She's in tears, and I don't think she's purposely trying to do this. It's just a natural reaction. But now, because of her reaction, people will know of Amnon's sin. Just like you know your sin will find you out. And that's what the Bible says, and this is what happens to Amnon here. Look at verse 20. Now Absalom comes into the picture. Has Amnon, your brother, been with you? So it's really interesting. Tamar comes out crying. Absalom says, has he been with you? Now, he doesn't say, did he violate you? He doesn't want to go far, but this must say something about Amnon and Absalom. Amnon must not have been that great of a guy if Absalom's like, I could see him doing this. Did he do something to you? Like, why would he ask that? He wasn't in the room. Everybody got thrown out. He wasn't there. But Absalom, it shows you, maybe there's something going on with Amnon. Maybe Absalom noticed how Amnon was acting around Tamar and knew something was up. Now hold your peace, my sister. He is your brother. Do not take this to heart. So Absalom's just telling her to be quiet, be peaceful. And it almost looks like he's dismissing it, but we know he's not dismissing this. He just wants to bring her peace. He's trying to calm her down. She's upset and says, just don't be silent. Don't worry about it. It's your brother. We'll take care of this. Well, one, it would have been dishonorable to the family if people found out, but they're going to find out anyway. But meanwhile, he wanted silence. He wanted silent revenge, and he wants to plot about how he wants to do this. He doesn't want to say, I'm going to kill him. Absalom's going to be crafty himself. So Tamar lived a desolate woman in her brother Absalom's home. So Absalom, you can see here, takes Tamar in because she's not going to be able to have a husband. She's not going to be able to have children because of what Amnon did to her. That's how the culture was back then, okay? So Absalom, you can see, being a good brother, is going to let Tamar live with her as this lonely, desolate woman, no children, no husband, sad probably forever. It's really awful what happens. We never really hear what happens from Tamar after this, which is sad. Verse 21, When King David heard of all these things, he was very angry. So David's righteous anger. How dare he do that to my daughter? But the only problem I have is it just says he was very angry. And then he's very angry. That's it. I was really mad about it. Like, what? This person raped your daughter and you're just, oh man, I can't believe he did that. All right, well, guys, have a good day. Like, what in the world? Like, David, I thought you were a godly man. Well, is David's family things getting in his ways? I know this personally. You can point out somebody's sin, but somebody really close to them is like, yeah, that's bad. Like, all right, well, you should probably leave that church. You should probably not do this, or you should probably not associate. Oh, that was just really bad. But you know what? It's them. I'm sure David saw that. And Amnon, he's my son. He's going to be the king. That is awful. But he's the next in line. And he's my son. And I love him. And, we all do bad things. You ever hear that? Don't judge. You can't judge lest you be judged. And all this nonsense that we hear from people. But Absalom spoke to Amnon neither good nor bad. He's staying silent. He is plotting in his mind because it says he hated Amnon because he had violated his sister Tamar. So he hates her, and he's going to be plotting, right? Then we go down here, verse 23. After 2 full years, think about that. Amnon probably thought he got away with it. He raped Tamar, and it's been 2 years, and nothing has happened. David got mad for a little bit day one, but the kings let it go. Kings forgot about it. He's put it in the past. Tamar's probably crying every day, but we're going to move on, right? It's been 2 years. Amnon thinks he got away with it. Everybody else probably thinks he got away with it. Think about that in our lives, and you look around and say, man, it's been 2 years, and that person's still not in jail for what they did. People still aren't telling them for what they are really doing, the secret life they're really living. Be sure that the Lord finds it out, whether it's on this earth or the next life, it'll be judged. But usually it comes out, even if it's been years. Don't think you get away with something just because your sin's been hidden for years. It comes out. Just go online, look at all the people on celebrities things they did years ago that we're finding out about now, right? That happens. So verse 23, Absalom had sheep shears at Baal Hazor, which is near Ephraim. So this is a time of feasting and celebration. He has an idea. We're going to have a party. People are going to be really excited about this. So Absalom invited all the king's sons. He wants to make it look like a nice royal family event. It's a nice feasting. Remember, Nabal had this before, Jacob and I think Laban. This is a sign when they're doing sheep shearing. It's a good economic event. So people are happy. They're going to be drinking wine, having a good time, eating, feasting. So he's going to invite all the sons. And it says Absalom even came to King David and invited them, right? But verse 25, David says, no, my son, let us not all go, lest we be burdensome to you. David refuses. He doesn't think anything of it. It's just going to be a celebration. But he says, hey, let's not all go. That would be a lot, right? We're not all going to go. So then Absalom said, well, if not, please let my brother Amnon go with us then, which would have been strange. Like, oh, if you can't go, another brother. Well, how about just let Amnon go? And David, look at his hesitation. Why should he go with you? Here it is again. David's discernment. The Holy Spirit's probably in David. Like, David, another red flag. You avoided these red flags in the past. Another red flag. Why does he want Amnon to go? And David asks, why? But Absalom pressed him until he let Amnon and all the king's sons go. And I can say, Dad, just let Amnon go. What's the big deal? What's the big deal? And he goes, and David says, well, yeah, I guess there's not a big deal. Whatever. All right, send Amnon. So again, red flag. David goes by. So it shows again, even a godly king like David can fail in discernment because he loves his family, wants to trust that they're doing the right thing. And he wants to think that everything's good. And he doesn't, even though it's kind of off that he asked that, he's just not going to ask any more questions. He'll just go along with it, right? Verse 28 says, then Absalom, or did I go past? Oh, yep. Absalom commanded his servants. So look at Absalom doesn't even kill him himself. He orders his servants to do it. He has them do his dirty work. There's people like this that hide behind others to do their dirty work. You can see Absalom here. He's not a great guy either. He says, mark when Amnon's heart is merry with wine. So let me know when he's drunk, guys. I want you guys, he wants his servants, let me know when he is drunk, right? And this is interesting because David got Uriah drunk. We're seeing the pattern again. David violated Bathsheba. Then he tried to get Uriah drunk to take care of the situation. We're seeing the same pattern here happen again. He's going to try to get Amnon drunk. And he says to them, strike Amnon, then kill him when he does. Do not fear, have I not commanded you? Which that's like borderline blasphemous, I think. Absalom's like, do not fear, have I not commanded you? Be courageous. Doesn't it sound like Joshua in the book of Joshua? Like, be strong, courageous. We're going to take it. It's like, yo, this is a crime. You're having me we're murdering your brother. And you're tricking them into bravery. He's manipulating his servants. Be strong, be courageous warriors. Go murder my brother for me. And they didn't even think about it because, they're going to be obedient. And it is sad. It's still like this today. They did a study. I was actually just talking about this, the Milgram study. They did a voltage test. See how much, you turn up on the voltage. This is a real study they did. And 200 volts could kill somebody. And they had the people turn it up higher, higher, and higher. And there's all actors except the person turning the knob. And they expected about 1% or less, because you had to be a sociopath, to go through and take orders to kill somebody for no reason in a test. 67% of humans will kill people if they're commanded to. So possibly you guys, I don't know, some of you guys in here could be pressured into it. So think about that. That test came out. We'll look at it. It's the Milgram test. 67% of people will kill people under orders. You know that with Nazi Germany and stuff. But don't think you're out of that. Think about it. Make sure to think about what people are telling you to do and commanding you to do. It's like, should I be doing this? I know my superiors are telling me this. I know the people I respect are telling me this. Is this good? Oh, that sounded sinful. I probably shouldn't do that. But studies show that people will go through, and he got manipulated. They got manipulated into being strong, courageous warriors by committing murder. So they're manipulated, right? So the servants of Absalom did to Amnon as Absalom had commanded. They kill him. Then all the king's son arose and each mounted his mule and fled. They're like, uh-oh, he's wiping out. They don't know. They're like, oh no. They've seen this before. They read about Abimelech in the past. He's killing all the sons. He wants to be king. Absalom wants to be king. He's going to kill us all. So they took off, right? They are afraid. And they're on mules because that means they're royalty. Royalty rode mules. But they think they're all getting murdered. They think Absalom's taken over now, which is interesting because he did invite David. And later he does want to take over the throne. It makes me wonder if he wanted to kill David when he was there too. Maybe. Why would he want to kill David? Well, David didn't do anything when his sister got raped. He didn't defend his sister. So perhaps Absalom's been wanting to kill David ever since then, ever since now, ever since 2 years before this, because David didn't act. And maybe that has to do with why Absalom wants to overthrow him and kill him as a king. Maybe he doesn't think David's a good enough, strong enough king that'll save people from violations. So perhaps this is where Absalom's hatred really comes from. And he really did want to take over the throne, but maybe not at this time. Verse 30. While they were on the way, news came to David, Absalom has struck down all the king's sons, and not one of them is left. So look at that. False news, rumors. They're all dead, David. They're all dead. So even back then, they had to get fake news and rumors and misinformation, and he thinks all of his sons are dead. So he's panicking. Somebody heard that one of them was dead, and they all fled, and this news just comes out. They're all dead, David. All your sons are gone. So he, goes into mourning mode, arises, tears his garments, lays on the earth. Then look at this. But Jonadab, this guy again, David, of the son of David's brother, said, let my lord suppose that they have all been killed. The king's son, for Amnon alone is dead. Jonadab, who, by the way, orchestrated this whole rape scene, right? He's the one that came up with the crafty idea. Is like, hey, don't worry. It's a rumor. They're not all dead. Only Amnon's dead. Why? Well, look what he says. For by the command of Absalom, this has been determined from the day he violated his sister Tamar. It's like, oh yeah, I heard 2 years ago he said he's going to kill her, David. Jonadab, he said he's going to kill her 2 years ago. You didn't tell anybody about this? You didn't stop it? Here's Jonadab again. Could have stopped another sin, right? First he finds out, oh, Amnon wants to rape his sister. And he's like, well, here's how you do it. It's like, and now you heard that, Absalom wants to kill Amnon. He's like, oh, well, good luck. And then Jonadab's here like, oh, no, he only killed one of them. I already know he's been plotting this murder for 2 years, David. Could you imagine what David probably thought of this Jonadab? So again, Jonadab's a guy. Why did Jonadab do this? Well, he just wants to have good favor. He's that guy that'll do whatever he can to be in good favor with the guys in power. Amnon was the crown prince, so if he's going to be king, I'll be his buddy. All right, well, he's dead. Well, I'll just be buddies with David and let him know that Absalom's been planning this the whole time. I already knew everything. So then maybe he'll trust me that I know things around the kingdom, right? This guy's bad news. It says, now therefore, let not my lord the king so take it to heart. Suppose that all the king's sons are dead. So it continues on. The last couple of verses here, verse 34, but Absalom fled, and the young man who kept the watch lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, many people were coming from the road behind him. So Absalom flees, and now he sees all these other men coming in, the watchman, the person up there watching. So they're probably concerned at first. There's a lot of people coming to the king here, and it says, and Jonadab said to the king, behold, the king's son has come about, as your servant said, so it has come about. It's like, told you so, told you they weren't dead, David, I told you they were alive. It's like, Jonadab, we don't care. This is chaos. And Jonadab's here just letting people know that he was right. I told you it wasn't all. Told you it wasn't all. That's just them coming. That's just those guys coming. I told you they would come. They're alive. That's what I was telling you, David. So there's Jonadab's real piece of work. Then it says, and as soon as he had finished speaking, behold, the king's sons came and lifted up their voices and wept. And also the king and all his servants wept very bitterly. So, they're all hurt. They're all upset about what had happened. Amnon has just been murdered. But Absalom fled and went to Talmai, the son of Ammihud, king of Geshur. And David mourned for his son day after day. So Absalom flees. And remember, his mother's Maacah. Well, his mom's dad was a king, right? So his grandfather's also king. His dad is King David, but Absalom's grandfather is King Talmai. So he's going to go to his grandfather's house and hang out in his grandfather's kingdom a while for, I think it says 3 years. He hides out. Yeah, so Absalom fled and went to Geshur and was there for 3 years. So it was 2 years he plotted on the murder. Then he murders, and then he's going to wait 3 years before he ever comes back to Israel. So from the time that Amnon violated Tamar till when Absalom's going to return has been a 5-year period. A lot of time is passing here. In verse 39, and the spirit of the king longed to go out to Absalom because he was comforted about Amnon since he was dead. So on one hand, David's mourning. He mourned for Amnon, but now that Amnon's dead, he says, well, I have two dead sons because Absalom's dead to me out there, and I just want my son back. I had one die. I don't want another one to die to me, spiritually or whatever. So he's just so upset. You can see he still has that paternal love. He loves his kids like every parent does, but they're getting in a lot of issues. But one of the big things that we see here, before we close, one of the big issues is David not doing anything to Tamar. And a lot of us think the reason David didn't do anything to Tamar is because if he would have, or did anything to Amnon for what he did to Tamar, if David would have judged Amnon, it would have been like judging himself because he did something similar to Bathsheba. So you'll notice, it's also another warning, why did David fail again so much here in his character? Well, because we're a lot less harsh on our own sins. So we're really harsh on people who are alcoholics or drug addicts because we don't do that. So how dare they? But then if there's this one secret sin that we have, it's like, ease up on them. We all are sinners. You can't judge because you know how. So you can see it here. David, I think, had he had never done that to Bathsheba, would have dealt with Amnon pretty hard. I don't know if he would have killed him or what he would have done, but he would have been dealt with pretty harshly, but he wasn't here. And I think it was a complicated issue because of David's sin, his family. And it just is a good warning to us that make sure you don't let people you trust or whatever get away with red flag sins or just ignore the sins because these are the kind of things that happen. And David's sin is now spun out of control where it's now affecting his family. But does anybody have any questions or comments or thoughts based on that? Yeah, Beard.
So I believe in the Levitical law when it gets into the instance of rape. In a town, the woman has a responsibility to cry out for help. Otherwise, she is held just as responsible for the incident as the man.
Yeah.
Did we not see, like, Tamar didn't make any noise, and there's people around?
Well, it does say that she went and cried weeping, but let's see what that verse actually says. I don't know if I can find it again here. There was a verse that said, let's see, get up and go. Here it says, so if you go to verse 19, and Tamar put ashes on her head and tore the long robe that she wore, and she laid her hand on her head and went away crying aloud as she went. So that will probably, again, what Beard's getting at here is if you didn't, it is one of those things, unless you said, I was violated, help me, unless you're crying out, you are seen as an accomplice, that you're a part of this adultery, right? That's why some people even take Bathsheba as that she was a part of it because she didn't cry out. Well, she was under the king's power, and we think Bathsheba was pretty innocent. But some people will say that, well, Bathsheba should have yelled for help. It's like, well, who's the king? What was she going to do, get murdered? Like, she was kind of in trouble there. But so I think that's why when it says she went away crying aloud as she went was to alert people that she had been violated. But that's a really good point, Beard. Anybody else have any other questions or comments based on any of that? All right. Well, thanks again, everybody. Go ahead. You can read ahead to chapter 14 where Absalom returns to Jerusalem 3 years later. We'll go ahead and jump into that next week, Lord willing. Until next time, keep reading your Bibles. Keep your lamps trimmed and burning.